One of the things that we're going to talk about more and more often as time goes on is the times that we are living in now are a massive disconnect biologically for us as a species. Now you're going to say, what the hell does this have to do with finance? Okay, and I'll get there.
Think of life as an epic game. Let's make sure you're playing to win every step of the way. Live big. Plan bigger. You're now listening to Wealth Hunters.
If you could imagine what life was like 50 years ago, right? Where your life expectancy was much, much shorter for a host of reasons, okay? The work environment was much, much harsher. So you really only had kind of the time frame to get educated, learn your trade, get into a job, live out that job, retire or die. Right, they were your options. And, something that really drove this home to me was watching this old cop show on, I think it was Netflix or something, Hill Street Blues. I don't know if anyone's ever watched that. And the only reason I got hooked on it was because I was a child of the 80s. I was born in 81, and Hill Street Blues episodes all happened in the 80s. And so it was so interesting to go into this time machine and look at what the world was like in that process. The thing that really stuck at me was that one of the main characters was having a midlife crisis in the show and was talking to one of his colleagues about how he felt that he had to do the detective's test because he'd been a police officer for X number of years, and his life was moving on and his child was growing up, and he felt like he was didn't have that much longer to do what he had to do. He was 39 years old in the episode, right? He even says it, I'm 39, I've been doing this for so long, and, I'm going to be up for my pension at some point and blah, blah, blah. And it really drove home to me how different life was back then. And it kind of made sense because if you think about those times, you were virtually independent at 16 or 17. You were married by 19 or 20. You had your first kid at 19 or 20. And so they could be off your hands and, you're 37, 38 years of age and the cycle continues. And for him, he looked at it and said, because life was a bit harder, healthcare wasn't as sophisticated as it is now, the chances of him being dead at 55 or 60 was real. Right? And again, the amount of pressure that was felt by that generation led them to do things in a certain way. And again, when our world has changed so dramatically in the space of 40 years, right? Where all of a sudden, life expectancy is late 80s, early 90s, okay? There are people who are 39 who are still living at home, let alone bloody have grown-up children. Well, that's not happening, okay? And we've got plenty of excuses and life's harder and it's more expensive and all those sorts of things. I suspect that if we were to take our lives now and go back 50 years, we'd probably be quite grateful for how difficult our lives are at the moment. But the point being that it's so challenging to try and determine purpose when the world is a completely different place, right? So if you could imagine back then, it was more about survival than it was about enjoyment or entertainment, okay? And that you knew you had a fixed window of time to get these things done, and if you didn't make those choices, that was it. Then we fast forward 35, 40 years into the future, and we don't leave home, sometimes ever. We have different relationships now than we've ever had before. We have kids later in life, if we have them at all. We are having fewer children. We have not the idea of having one job your entire life. That's intracranial lead therapy stuff for most people. There's no way they can get their head around working for one place or having one job or one business for their entire lifetime. And when we're planning, I do retirement planning with people now who are 50, who are fit as a fiddle, who are literally going to live almost their entire lifetime again, but plan to not be working for most of it, right? So the entire process has changed. And it's no wonder that people suffer paralysis by analysis because, when you're 17 years of age and you're thinking, well, I've still got another 10 years of home life, contrary to your parents' wishes. I've got another 10 years of home life ahead of me and I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I can go to university and do a Bachelor of Dance Theory or saving whales or whatever it is that you want to do with your life until you decide you don't want to do it anymore. We even have jobs that aren't real jobs like this one, podcasting and influencing and all that sort of garbage and nonsense, right? So in doing that, you can become a life coach. Don't get me started. Business coaching. Don't get me started. Financial advisor. Don't get me started. All of these scam occupations. Anyway, so you can do all of these things, but when you get sick of it or you not happy with things, you can just change it and move on. So the reason why I draw that distinction is that when I think back to all the potholes that I stepped in myself and how I ended up to be where I am here today, I was without the very first of the three fundamental tenets of making a good decision, and that was I didn't have clarity of purpose, right? And I know that sounds a bit wanky, okay, but purpose is essential because without it, everything falls apart. There is absolutely no point making a financial decision without clarity of purpose. Happens to me all the time when a client will say, what do you think I should do about A, B, or C? Should I go and buy X, Y, Z, right? My first question is, well, what's the point? Why? Why do we need to have it? What is the purpose we're trying to achieve? And without the clarity of purpose, you have nothing else because the purpose is the first tenet which leads on to the second. So from an investment standpoint, let's say that there are really a handful of purposes. Number one is that we could be looking for capital growth. That is, we want to buy an asset today for $1 so that it can appreciate in value over time and eventually be worth $2, right? The second purpose is income, right? We want to get some sort of income from the asset. Now, those could be mutually exclusive. We could have capital growth, or we could have income, or we could have the purpose of having capital growth and income, right? And you think, well, of course, I want the third one. The problem is that you can't have it all, right? So you could say, well, in one asset where we know we want to get capital growth, you'll get lots of capital growth if there's very little income. In other assets, you'll get lots of income if there's very little capital growth. If you want to get capital growth and income, you're going to get a mitigated version of both. You're going to get a slightly smaller amount. Now, the reason why it's super important to come to that conclusion is because it really then informs the next tenet, which is time frame. How long do we have to achieve this purpose? How long are we willing to wait if we have problems achieving the purpose? How long do we have to realize the benefits of the purpose that we're trying to achieve? And only then, once you have clarity around purpose and around time frame, do you then start to look at, well, what is it? What should we be investing in that suits our purpose and our time frame? Take, for example, I'll give you a couple of real life examples. Often superannuation is a super easy one, right? Essentially for super, particularly when you're young, one of the fundamental purposes is capital growth. I want to put my money somewhere so that the money that goes in there every week of every working day of my life grows over time so that by the time I retire, I can do something with it. On the flip side to that, when you're retired and your asset base is big enough, then you find yourself in a position where you want income, okay? Or you want capital growth and income over time because we're going to be here for ages and we need the value of that asset to keep growing. And so getting clarity on that is really, really important because it's going to then dictate the time frame, which then tells us in line with risk, and we'll talk about risk in another episode, what underlying assets should we be investing in. And the third tenet, we always call it, what the hell is it? That most people don't have a clue what their actual underlying assets actually are, what they're made of, how they work, who's responsible for them, right? And that's one of the key areas where the wheels fall off really, really quickly because people will say things like, well, I have a Sun Super, so that's where my investment is. No, it's not. Sun Super is a brand. Host Plus is a brand. Macquarie is a brand. Vanguard is a brand. They're brands. They're vehicles, right? It's like when someone says, I have a Toyota. Is that good car? Well, Toyota is a brand, right? Whether the car is a good car depends entirely on the purpose of the vehicle, right? So if you have a family of 7, but you own a Suzuki Swift, crap car, right? If you're 17, need a first vehicle and can only afford a certain amount, Suzuki Swift, perfect car, right? You have to match the particulars of the vehicle to your purpose and your time frame. And so just knowing the name of the vehicle isn't enough. You then have to dig deeper. So there are heaps of people who don't realize a few things. And super, we'll go into super in a lot more detail later. But for example, you actually have the choice as to what happens to your super. What is it, where it goes? And not only just the name of the vehicle, but what happens once it's inside that area. The problem that I have is usually in one or two camps. You either don't know anything about it, haven't done anything, so it's sitting in the default allocation. So when I ask you what is it, you go, I don't know, right? Or you take a really good active interest, but still don't really have any fundamental understanding of what is it. And then you go and do a whole bunch of things because it feels good or it seems better than doing nothing. Okay. And then we still run into problems because what you may have chosen to do may not be appropriate for your purpose and your time frame. So whenever I'm making a financial decision, whenever a client says, hey, James, what should I do? I will always come back and ask the three three tenets, always. And I don't care if you've been a client for 20 years and have millions with me, or you've been here for 2 seconds and we have $5,000 in super. It makes no difference to me. The questions are exactly the same. What is the purpose? What is the time frame? What the hell is it, right? What are we actually investing in, okay? If you can get those 3 things sorted, you will have at least got the foundations right to start making informed choices. The next distinction that needs to be drawn is the distinction between strategy and tactics, right? Strategy and tactics. Most people think those words are interchangeable. They're not. They're 2 very different things. So imagine if we are a military, right? And our job is to storm the beaches, okay? So we want to storm the beaches of Normandy. The problem with the beaches at Normandy is that the beach is very, very narrow. The cliffs are very, very high. The enemy's already in the turrets shooting down onto the sand, okay? And we can keep pouring people onto that beach all day long. It doesn't have a good outcome. So we know strategically that we need to get to the high ground. The only way we can get to the high ground is to think strategically in this process. When this actually happened in the Second World War, the tactical approach was different. First of all, we need to approach the beach from different directions. Why? So we can distract the fire, okay? Tactically, to achieve the strategy of getting to the high ground, the Allied forces dropped paratroopers in behind enemy lines days before the Normandy invasion. Why? So those paratroopers could come back towards the turrets, blowing up the bridges and the train lines as they went. Why? So that it could stop the reinforcements coming through. Those were the tactics that enabled the Allied forces to help take the beach that day. So we still don't have clarity as people who believe we've got purpose about what our strategic end is even supposed to be. And if we don't know where we're heading strategically, how do we know which tactics we should be applying along the way to make the distinction? So as we get into the process and as you start thinking about your own financial situation, there are 2 schools of thought that you need to address, and you need to be really clear on these 5 things. 1, purpose. What is it we're trying to achieve? What is the time frame that is required to make that happen? What is it that we need to be investing in, doing, reducing, increasing to make that happen? And then, what is our strategic end game? What are we trying to achieve here? What is the high ground for us strategically? And only once we have clarity in the high ground do we then say, okay, what is an appropriate tactic to employ to make these things happen? Knowing full well that some tactics are going to work, some tactics are going to fail. You're going to get to a point where life is going to change around you, so that the strategy and tactics that we employ today may not be the strategy and tactics that we employ in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, because you can only play what's in front of you. But as time changes, you have to keep coming back to those fundamentals every single time. And I get it from advisors who say to me, we educate other advisors in what we do and how we do it. And they go, James, what do you talk to clients about in their first review meeting? Oh, that's easy. We talk about what we talked about in our first meeting. Okay, well, what do you talk about in your second review meeting? Oh, that's easy. We talk about what we talked about in the first review meeting, but we then align it to, okay, well, have we achieved our strategic end? What other tactics need to be applied? What has changed in this war, in this battle of attrition, that we need to start to look at those tactics and work out, do we still have the same purpose? Has our time frame become condensed or expanded? Do we still have enough faith in what we've actually done to achieve that strategic endpoint with the tactics that we've employed? So if you're going to start to build any plan for yourself and you don't have absolute clarity on purpose, time frame, and what is it, and you don't have a clear distinction on strategy and tactics, talk to someone about getting clarity in those areas, because if you don't get that right, everything else is for nothing.
We are Life Sumo. lifesumo.com.au